This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Exvangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. My guest this week is Austin Channing Brown. Austin is the author of the new book, I'm Still Here, Black Dignity. Hello and welcome to Exvangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. My guest this week is Austin Channing Brown. Austin is the author of the new book, I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. In this conversation, we talk about her book, why white leaders let themselves believe that the mere presence of people of color is enough, and why this sort of difficult work that she does is so worth it. You can find her book, I'm Still Here, wherever books are sold, and you can learn more by visiting austinchanning.com and following her on Twitter at austinchanning to learn more. As always, you can also follow me on Twitter at brchastain. You can follow the show on Twitter at exvangelicalpod and like the podcast over at facebook.com/exvangelicalpod. You can also join our Facebook group, which has grown from just 47 members last July to over 2,700 as of this recording, which is incredible. Or also you can join the conversation on Twitter with hashtags like Exvangelical, hashtag HowToEvangelical, the hashtags being Exvangelical, Christian Alt Facts, and Empty the Pews for just a few. You can also email me at contact@exvangelicalpodcast.com. Finally, if you enjoy this show, please support it by rating it and reviewing it on iTunes and by supporting the show directly via Patreon over at patreon.com/exvangelicalpod. All right, everyone, let's get into it. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Exvangelical. My guest this week is Austin Channing Brown. She is the author of the new and wonderful book, I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really glad I'm able to talk to you about your book. Your book is really phenomenal, and I've been sort of watching everything on Twitter and everything and seeing, seeing the accolades pour in, and they're all deserved, and they're all, it's awesome to see this succeed in the way it is, because it's like the perfect book for our time. It's not an easy book, but it's not easy times. So
I love that. Yeah, the response is blowing me away. I really don't even know what to do with it, I'll be honest. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely accept it, because it's it's well deserved. So.
Oh, you're so kind. Thanks.
So let's talk a little bit about you, and get a little bit of a sense of really where you're from and everything. That's sort of where we start on this show, is just getting a little bit of background. I believe you're also a Midwesterner, right?
I am.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So where did you grow up, and what was your sort of first few years and first exposure to religion like for you?
Yeah. So I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. And my parents sent me to a private Christian school, like as early as preschool, like as long as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but we weren't a church-going family. So I had assumed that we were all Christians. Just because I went to a Christian school.
Right, yeah.
And it turned out my parents actually sent me there just because it was the best education that they could find in the city at that time. So that's actually kind of comical to me that I was just like drinking up this religion, and my parents really couldn't have cared less. I mean, like, or at least it wasn't a priority. I won't say they didn't care, but
right.
So I was reading illustrated Bibles and playing Bible recitation games, and learning all those cute little Bible story songs.
Yeah.
I did memorize a Bible verse every Friday. We had Bible class.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was very much just inundated in the curriculum. And the school wasn't very large. I don't think I ever had a class that was more than maybe 20 to 25 students.
Mm-hmm.
So it was also very personal. Like I knew all of my teachers really, really well. And even though I was only one of a handful of Black students in every class, because the classroom was so small, I really did still felt perfectly comfortable. I never walked into a classroom and felt like I didn't belong there. But yeah, I was. I had no like pushback on what I was learning. I was like, okay, so this is Jesus. This is God. He saved my sins. I was going with it. I was with him.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if that's what you're being taught, that's what you're being taught as a kid.
Yeah. I was totally with him. I was like, okay.
And then, so what I love about your book is that, like, really it doesn't pull any punches. And the way in which you do that, like the first chapter, first line of your book is white people are exhausting, and you share this anecdote from when you were young and you were at a library, and then you had this experience where you learn about why your parents chose the name that they gave you.
Right.
So I know this could be a little bit of a teaser for people that haven't picked up your book yet. So
Sure.
If you could sort of retell that story, because I think that's very, I mean, the way you frame that and the way you show that this is something you've had experience with your entire life, and
totally. Yeah. So I had always known that my name was a quote unquote boy's name. It was partly because of school. In your younger years, all the girls will sit on one side and all the boys will sit on the other side of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so during the first day of school, when teachers would do their roll call, they would always look to the opposite side of the room. And I'd be on the other side doing jumping jacks, trying to get them to look at me. Like, I'm over here. And then the other thing was that the late 80s, early 90s were like, everything got personalized. It was like the little personalized keychain license plates and the personalized cups, and you know what I mean? And so I would always go and try and find my name. And if my name was there, it was always blue for the boys.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, why do these people not realize that, right? So I learned pretty quickly that Austin must be a boy's name because everyone treated it as such. But there was most people, once they heard my name and realized it was me, were like, oh, that's so interesting, or oh, that's so cool, or that's so unusual. But there was like this recovery moment, right? They were like, huh, all right, taking it in. And this one day I had gone to the library, which we did often, and I was all ready to check out my little books, and I handed her my library card, and the librarian said to me, are you sure this is your card? And I hesitated for a second, thinking, well, it could be my brother's card. It could be my mother's card. Like, I think I handed you my card, but I guess I can't be sure, right?
Right.
And so she reads, so she can tell that I'm hesitating. And she's like, the card says Austin. And I said, oh, yeah, that's my card. That's me. She said, are you sure? And I was stumped again. I said, am I sure I'm Austin? I was really like, I don't understand the question. Do you think I don't know my name? Like, I don't get it. And she really would not stamp my little books. And I thought, ma'am, my name is Austin. That card says Austin. Give me my doggone books. I don't understand what the problem is, right? And so I was so ticked. I went over to my mother and I was like, Mom, why did you give me this name? I don't understand. And so she started to tell me about my family's history and where they found the name. And I was like, Ma, I already know this. That's not my question. My question is not, where did my name come from? My question is, why did you choose it? And so we sat down and she said, well, Austin, we knew that when people read your name, they would assume that you are a white male. And I was like, oh. And she kept going. She said, one day you're going to have to fill out applications. You're going to have to, apply for a job or apply for college And she said, we just wanted to make sure that you could make it to the interview. She's like, once you get to the interview, we're sure you'll blow everyone away. Like you're so charismatic and you're so this and you're so that. And then she said it again. We just had to make sure you made it to the interview. Mm. And I was like, huh. So I didn't know what to do with like the interview stuff, like the assumption of discrimination. That was a little too much for me. And at that age. But my brain did scroll through every other time I had ever heard or met someone named Austin. And it was always a white little boy. And I was like, holy shit, she's right. I was like, I've never met another Black Austin. How weird. So it took me a while to like really understand what she was trying to tell me. But what I understood in that moment was that my parents were trying to be strategic, and they were trying to be strategic because I was Black and because I was a girl. And I didn't fully know what that meant, but I do think it was the first time that what I was trying to figure out about race and how race worked, like it finally landed for me, even in just a small way. Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't that I was unaware that I was, one of a handful of Black kids. It wasn't that I couldn't, kids figure out race really early. I just didn't know what it meant. And so that was the first time that I was like, oh, this is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that seems that you come back to this theme in so many different ways in the book, mm-hmm. as far as like this, I believe that the term you use is like an assumption of universality.
Yep. That's right.
Within the educational system, yep. It manifested in this way that that your teachers expected you all to have the same experience.
That's right.
Yeah.
White people are so used to being in dominant culture, mm-hmm. That it doesn't often occur to white folks that there are other legitimate ways of being. Mm-hmm. And so, and because whiteness doesn't think of itself as a race, it can only think of itself as normal or universal. Mm-hmm. So whatever right. experience you're having, everybody else is having. And we're like, nope. Nope. And I think Christians have this really bad because we have carried this mantra that we are all the same and we are all one body and we are right, like all these unifying messages that cover over difference, mm-hmm. rather than embracing difference.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I grew up in small town Indiana, so we sang like red and yellow, black and white.
Exactly.
That sort of thing that seemed to try to do something.
Right.
Something good, I guess. But
I think
not.
So.
Yeah. But yeah, it absolutely the way in which white churches in particular, like
right.
UM and Wesleyan background sort of for me personally, and that's predominantly white. So
yeah.
And so that's definitely it's that assumption that's there. Was that something that you? I'm curious how like when, because you went to a Christian college as well, right?
I did. Oh, yeah. I have only ever attended Christian schools. So I went to a Catholic high school. So my elementary school and junior high was run by Assemblies of God.
Okay.
And then I went to a Catholic high school. And then I went to a Covenant college. And then I went to a Catholic college to get my master's degree.
Mm. And the way it's, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Okay.
Bear with me here. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, you're asking about college.
Yeah. And so you've got this overlap of a couple of different systems here.
Right.
You've got the educational system, and then you overlay that with like some religious dogma.
Mm-hmm. A whole lot of religious dogma.
With those sorts of things being taken into account, these being in these places that were dominantly white. Mm-hmm. What, like where did you see yourself reflected in that at all, or was it
Mm,
in these other spaces that you write about, like being in predominantly Black churches?
sure, sure, sure. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so you might be surprised to find I can be a little militant. Um, and so I was pretty used to claiming my space. I didn't often walk into, and I think this is part of what my parents were so intentional about doing, even through my name, that they were trying to say to me, wherever you are, you belong, right? And we're preparing you for the hangups of other folks, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing wrong with you,
Right.
right? We're prepping you for how other folks are going to trip, but you need to know that you belong everywhere. And so I have always carried a certain amount of pride, whether healthy or not, like in some respects, very healthy. And in some respects, maybe a little too much, um, when it turned into arrogance. And so like, I remember so by the time I was 10, or at the age of 10, my parents started going to a Black Baptist church. And I just fell in love with that church. Lord have mercy. Um, I was in love. It was the first time um, that I had been around all Black folks, that I was in the majority, and that I had experienced both Christianity and my culture coming together. So I had briefly been in spaces that were quote unquote secular, or that didn't have this like Christian overlay on top of it, um, and been in all Black spaces, so Black neighborhoods. Or my dad grew up in Akron, and so anytime we went there, it was definitely all Black. But to walk into a church and to have this Christianity that I was learning in school, but also have all this Blackness, was like, holy smokes, this is amazing. um, and I was really, really intentional. I really did fall in love with preaching. I fell in love with communicating, as y'all can probably imagine, hearing my, Black pastor compared to a white minister at my chapel services.
Mm-hmm.
Very different experience.
Yeah.
And so I just fell in love with this way of communicating, with this way of moving people. Um, it was really extraordinary to me. And so the more I learned about Jesus, about Bible stories, some I had heard, but some with a completely different context, completely different outcome connotation, as I listened to my pastor unpack them.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I got to high school, I was a little bit of a firecracker. And so I would sit in my religion classes, and and I would listen to the other students who were Catholic struggle with discovering what Catholics actually believe and what they don't believe. So, like, basically what they learned in Sunday school versus what Catholicism actually looks like as an adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be like, this is so interesting. And I remember I would raise my hand. I'd be like, well, this is what Baptists think. Like, well, in my church, this is how we understand it. So, but it was so I didn't have a whole lot of like devastation. And I was very comfortable with claiming my space, but that didn't make it less annoying when white folks tried to return to this notion of universality.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, I just really didn't appreciate that. And I think it got stronger in college, because when you start making noise in college and there are no like parents around, um, white students start responding with things like, well, why don't you just leave? Or why don't you just go to a different school? And, I just didn't really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was very comfortable claiming my space. And I think in college is where I started to question the system, because by the time I was in college, that was when like being diverse really became popular. And I remember it, maybe it always was, but I remember the school being really like it was part of their tagline, like we are multicultural was like
Yeah.
across the billboard. Right? Like we heard it all the time.
Right.
And because of that, I had some expectations, around mentorship, around being seen, around being taken care of, around being represented. And when I walked into this college and realized that those things weren't necessarily happening, yeah, my little life took on a whole new level of militancy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do write in your book that like within these Baptist contexts, you said like Jesus sounded like a black person.
Yeah.
And how like the way in which that was presented and the things that Jesus goes through in the gospel, that sounds like that sounds like a black person.
Totally.
And then, I live in Chicago now, so I like and I think a lot about similarly I think a lot about institutions and how things are presented. And in Chicago, it's a diverse area. There's a lot
That's
of
right.
like a lot of religious and ethnic makeups, like a lot of that. But then it's also prone to a lot of like just the city itself is prone to segregation.
That's right.
By neighborhood, by economics. There's a lot of factors there. But again, you went to a covenant school, and I don't know if you say the name of the school at all, but or if it's
I think it's fine. I'm a little upset with them right now.
Right?
But
yeah, they've got some stuff going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't change that I learned a lot from them.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I mean, I used to do that with Indiana Wesleyan. So I went, but then when, Penn spoke at their commencement, and that sort of, I started talking a little more plainly after that. But
I understand.
But anyways, so at North Park, here in the city, it's a covenant church. There's likely going to be this assumption of white culture.
Right.
And a question I have for you as far as your experiences there and in places like that.
Sure.
What does the presence of like people of color in a population sort of do that seems to like mollify or make white leaders and participants sort of think that well now we're better, like this, we're done, what is it that makes that seem like that's enough?
Oh man, currently it's the credibility is built around numbers, right?
Yeah.
So if you can prove that you have got the right numbers, if you're over 20%, or if you've got a certain number of languages that your students speak, or if you can proclaim the demographics of the neighborhood where you're located in, or certain percentage of your faculty, but all credibility seems to lie in the number. And I think what a lot of white folks really don't understand is that the quantity of persons of color does not equal the quality of our experience.
Right.
And that's what I know that like my class and at least the classes 3 ahead of me and 1 behind me were very intentional about saying to administration over and over and over again that you don't get to put my face on one of your billboards, but I don't get to see my face in the chapel service. That's not okay.
Right.
And so if we're going to talk about the fact that we're multicultural, then I need to see that show up. So when we gather together and worship, you can't just sing Chris Tomlin songs. That's not okay.
Yeah.
I need to hear some Fred Hammond, and my sister next to me would like us to sing in Spanish occasionally. And, like we got to stretch this out. And then in other ways too, in faculty representation and the curriculum and, the courses that were required to take and the courses that weren't. We were adamant about saying, if this is who you proclaim you're going to be, then you have to be it in more than number. And I think there's so many, and that's not specific to North Park, right? Like, as you mentioned, that is that's a structural issue.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely. It's
So,
not specific to,
yeah.
it's
Um,
plenty of similar institutions.
so many similar institutions um, that have not, truthfully, that have not thought beyond what diversity can do for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the bottom line,
Right.
know. Um, and I hope that as a result of this book, um, that institutions will begin to ask the question, but what is it costing people of color to be around us? And how can we be better?
Mm-hmm.
How can we really honor the dignity of the people of color who have chosen to be in ministry with us?
Yeah. Yeah. And you speak to that in so many different ways, and like they all overlap, and I know we've only got like half an hour left. So it's like but one of the key ways that I think you bring this up, there's lots of themes. There's things about like white fragility and white guilt,
Sure,
and
sure.
like, and this is again just like not even centering your experience right now, which but the like the ways in which, like, if there's white leaders or predominantly white leaders,
Right.
one of the things that you said was that white people tend to try to turn a conversation about race into a debate about race.
That's
Which I
right.
thought was a really salient distinction. And I'd love to sort of to hear you say a little bit more about that too, and just how, like, what the difference is between like someone trying to debate like the reality of racism
Yep.
and
Yep.
actually having a conversation that assumes that racism is a problem.
Right. I think you actually just nailed it. So a lot of white folks grow up, one, either hearing that there isn't a problem, right? That there used to be, and then Martin Luther King solved it, and now we're all good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, short
Yeah.
version of the story.
Right. Yeah.
Or they grew up actually listening to racist things while also being told that you just need to be polite or you just need to be kind, right? Like we only say these things in the house, but when you leave this house, you need to be nice to people, and
Yeah.
that's all that's required, right? Just
Right.
be nice. Just don't mention race. We're just going to be colorblind, right? Like all these messages. And then over top of that, there are all these stereotypes, racial biases, media messages about Black people and others, right? And other people of color. And so that might be that Black men are dangerous, or that Black women are always angry, or that Latinas are spicy and sassy, or Asian Americans are nerdy and studious, right? But there's all these, right, these overlays of what white America is soaking up. And so what happens is whiteness often feels like it's right. So there's a conversation about race that's happening, and people of color are sharing their lived experiences and are sharing what they have studied, what they have read, what they have, right? And then whiteness pops up and says, "Oh, no. That's not right. That's incorrect." And I know that's incorrect because I served in a Black community for a year when I was in college. Or I know that's incorrect because I have a Black friend who told me so. Or but I once heard Oprah agree with me on this thing, right? And it becomes a way to reinforce what whiteness has already believes about race, as opposed to being humble and saying, I think I have probably only gotten one story about race, and I would really like to hear the other side of the story.
Yeah.
I would really like to hear about other folks' experience. I I would really like to learn more about history. I would really like to understand more about what theology looks like in a Black church or um, in in a context that is completely different from mine.
Right.
And so often that humility is lacking. And that's what white supremacy is, right? White supremacy is whiteness knows best. Whiteness is right. Whiteness is holy. Whiteness is right. And so to attempt to step out of that and practice humility is a big step. It's a really, really big step.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does. Yeah. And it's a bridge too far for some people, which
it's true. It's true. And you know what? I just thought about this. The truth is that it has to be two steps, right? To even get to this, because one is the humility that you might not know. And the other, though, is that people of color might just have something you need to learn.
Right.
Right. So it's actually this two-step process that requires combating white supremacy right from the start. Yeah.
Yeah. And you talk about your experience in addressing that. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the chapter, but you talk about leading a class, and then this dude just stewing in the back, waiting to give you what for.
That's right. That's right.
And then, then another instance at a place where you were working, just all these instances of people shoving their whiteness and their correctness down your throat.
Right. That's absolutely right. And it's exactly what we just said, right? So here's my body. This is what my parents were trying to save me from, right? Here's my name that's written on a website or written on a graphic that says, that assumes this white man is going to be teaching this class about race, right? And white men are like, ooh, right? A white guy is going to teach this class about race. And then they walk in and they're like, you're not a white guy. And they can't get over it, right? So here's a Black woman talking about what it's like to be Black in America and is challenging whiteness and is challenging the folks in the room to stay in a position of learning and unlearning. And there are some folks who literally cannot handle it.
Yeah. And it does seem to be that sense that you said earlier in the conversation that there's a default dominance that
that's right.
That people are that white people are
that's right.
expecting to have.
That's right. And so it has to reassert itself. And that's when you get into the white fragility, white aggression, like this. There is a very deep desire for whiteness to say you're wrong and I'm right. And I'll do whatever I have to do in order to reassert that dominance.
Right. Yeah. And that's where, like, just thinking through all the things you say in your book, as far as the barriers that people have to, the barriers that people have to even having a conversation or even acknowledging the reality of something.
Right.
Acknowledging the reality of your lived experience. It, like white guilt, white fragility, like all of that. That's just a refusal to even have to. It's just an outright refusal to think or to like.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I think about this as far as like trying to think of how to talk to other white people about things like this.
Right. And
the main thing that I try to do is have people like you talk, like, because what the hell do I know? Like what the hell do I know? So that's why I'd rather ask you questions.
Yeah, I think it's a both and. After that particular situation with the guy who blew up in the middle of the class or after the class, I went home and told my husband about it because he wasn't there that night, and I told him how, even though I tried to keep my voice even though I tried to stay calm, I even dropped my voice like octaves and octaves to try and like will him to come down,
Right.
and no matter what I did, it just didn't work. And then one of my white male coworkers came over and said, basically, why don't I try? Basically what happened. And the two of them walked away to the other side of the room, and he instantly calmed down talking to him.
Right.
And so I went home and told my husband, and my husband said, "You know what, Austin? Some white folks are so sick, are so full of racism, um, that the medicine you offer them isn't enough. And there's going to be some folks who are so sick that the only medicine they can receive is from other white people."
Mm-hmm.
And I have had to really, really take that to heart, that there are some folks that are only going to hear the other voices of other white people, and that they'll need to see it modeled how other white people are able to listen, are able to practice humility, are able to um, not just like submit in and like a painful right, like this
Right.
painful, oh my gosh, this hurts so much kind of way, right? But to see the enthusiasm of white folks who are learning and who
Mm-hmm.
are enlivened by this discussion and who feel fully awake
Right.
because of this discussion. I think there are some white folks who really, really, really have to see what other white folks are doing. At least initially.
Yeah.
So I think it's a both and. I think white folks definitely, have to continue to listen to people of color and amplify our voices. But there really are some voices that are never going to hear me because I am a Black woman.
Yeah. And that's I mean, it's too bad for them. You know?
Well, I think so.
It's yeah. Uh, so what I mean with things like that, and like you're very passionate about this. This is something that you've written an entire book about, like and at the same time it's, again, what do you do to like sort of center yourself instead of how do you, I guess, balance this entering these difficult discussions with like also just being able to celebrate who you are, because that's a lot of, you're taking on a lot of emotional labor, a lot of
Right.
and you talk about this in your book as far as how you how like you're not a priest for white guilt,
Right.
which is like, and you talk about the experience of being a stand-in for someone else's
Right.
trying to assuage their
Yep.
to pardon them, which are like, damn it, like,
Mm-hmm.
anyways, and so like there's this balance of you have this very hard work that you're doing,
Yeah.
and then on top of that you need to take care of yourself too. So like,
Yeah.
how does that factor in, and like to other people of color that are also going to read this book and sort of
Sure.
resonate in that they are also working in predominantly white spaces, even
Yep.
religious ones,
Yep.
that might have this. How do you sort of approach those sorts of things?
Yeah, it's really been a journey for me trying to figure this out. And at different points in my life, different things have worked. So I've had jobs where where the job was figuring out diversity stuff, right? Whether that's trainings or classes or crunching numbers, like whatever. But I had to be clear about how much time I could devote to that, what the expectations were from my supervisors, and just creating really clear boundaries. And then there are other places where I've worked with diversity has not been part of my like job description. But I was still like writing. So I was doing, racial justice stuff in my free time. And I refused to do it at work. I was like, nope, I'm not going to come speak at your thing. Like, nope. Right. And I used to be like, here's where I teach a class. Like, here's where I do this in my free time. And if you want to hear me talk about race, you should come to this class. That's what you should do. Because for me, that was a very clear boundary, right? I'm not getting paid. I'm getting paid for this job over here. You're not paying me to be a diversity person. And so, so trying to come up with really clear boundaries. And then the other thing I'll say that's been big for me is figuring out who my audience is. Because not all, how do I say this? We're all on different points in our journey.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
There are some people who are still being convinced. There are other folks who woke up because of Black Lives Matter. There's other folks who woke up after Trump. There's other, people can be all along this journey. And I am very clear that at this point in my life, I am talking to what I call the 2.0 folks, right? Those folks who have already started doing the work, who are already committed, who have been in this work for a little while and are asking the question, what's next? Which is honestly, which is why I didn't expect this book to be nearly as popular as it is. That's why the first sentence is white people can be exhausting, because I was talking to folks who have been doing this work long enough to know exactly what I mean by that. Right? Who aren't offended by it, who, in fact, typically when I get before an audience and I say that first sentence, the entire audience laughs, including white people. Because they know exactly what I mean, right? Because they've been in the room where that guy has blown up, and they've been in the room where, someone decided to stand up and quote Wikipedia as their like source for shooting down the expert. Right. Like other white people who have been in the rooms with these conversations are like, yep, I don't understand. I don't know why people are so exhausting. And so I think part of it is getting real clear about who your audience is, and then figuring out what kind of self-care, what kind of boundaries are required in order to work with that audience.
Yeah. I mean, and another item for the book, there is a whole chapter about that too, a short interlude.
Yes. Because I really care about people of color who do this work.
Right.
I really, really do.
Yeah. Oh shoot. I'm sorry. I don't. This is a little bit of an aside. I apologize. It's just popped into my head while I'm thinking of another thing here. But the comedian, have you ever heard Hari Kondabolu? He has got a new.
No.
Anyways, he is. I apologize. I'm not sure whether he's Pakistani or Indian.
Okay.
But he's Indian, Pakistani or Indian American, and I believe he's Indian. He has a whole. He talks a lot about race in his stand-up.
Okay.
And he's like, I know some white people are okay, but then but he's like, if you think I'm talking about when I say white people, I mean you. Like, I mean, and so, anyways, I'm sorry that totally just randomly popped into my head.
No, that is absolutely perfect. I need to go find it. And yes.
Yeah. And
1,000%.
It's like, and then he goes further and he's like, some of you are okay, but the ones that aren't, let's not even call them white people. Let's call them let's call them white demons.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So anyways, he's got a new thing on Netflix, and he's also got I'll probably end up cutting this part out because it's not about your book, but it popped into my head there for a second.
I am absolutely gonna go look it up.
Yeah. So I absolutely admire how much you've put your own experience into this book, and it is a memoir. It's a memoir about something that absolutely has to be talked about, and how one line that jumped out to me is going back to earlier in your life when you were sort of witnessing a fellow student in high school talk about how she didn't get into her college that she wanted because of affirmative action. Like that just had to be it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what you write is like a lack of confrontation did her no favors.
Yeah.
And the other sort of theme that I really that I really liked that you also talked about in that is that this was later in the book, but you talk about how like anger is not necessarily bad, and I think that like within evangelical circles, you got to play nice, like that's part of the culture. Like you're expected to forgive quickly or to not be angry at all. And I think that a lot of people that are within circles like this, like whether it's whether it includes race as part of the contributing factor or not, within evangelical circles, if they feel dissatisfied or if they see something that isn't just happening, they get angry, but then they are taught to distrust that anger.
Right.
But what I just absolutely love about your entire book is that like you don't shy away from those confrontations. You don't shy away from talking about things as they are. So what do you hope to sort of see in just talking specifically about like within religious circles, like as we talk right now, like there's a resolution in front of the Southern Baptist Convention to like condemn social justice. Like, so we've got some really regressive beliefs like being propagated.
Right.
So keeping in mind that like we can't not confront these things, and people are not going to be, even keel about it all the time.
That's right. That's right.
And it's wrong.
I think it's important for us to remember that it's always been this way.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of white folks are only just waking up to it and only just realizing the level of animosity that exists around this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But in slavery, right, there were folks who were using the Bible to promote slavery and to say this is what God wants. And there were folks using the Bible to say, nope, actually, I don't think so. I think God is a liberator.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing in the civil rights movement, right? It was birthed in the church, and yet there were white churches who were saying, nope, here's where I can prove that segregation is exactly what God wants. Here's where I can prove that Black people are inferior. Here's where I can show it to you. And so even now, as there are folks who are using the Bible to say that this is not an issue you should care about, that gives us all the more reason for why we must proclaim even louder that God is a God of love and that God loves all bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And that if we don't love all bodies, then we must question whether we love God. And I think we talk a lot about how hard the conversation is, how hard the work is. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that it isn't fulfilling. That doesn't mean that it isn't life-giving. That doesn't mean that it hasn't reaped incredible rewards in terms of relationship, in terms of victories, in terms of experiencing change, in terms of transforming our lives. And I think we all have to do a better job of telling that story. It would almost be like we told the story of Jesus dying for our sins, but don't tell that he was also resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
We do need to tell the hard part, but we got to tell the good part too. Like there are more good parts. So we got to talk about the good parts. Because I think people need to know that we're inviting them into more than just sacrifice, right? That we're inviting them into wholeness, that we're inviting them into relationship, that we're inviting them into a passionate purpose, that we're inviting them into something beyond what they could possibly expect. And that is so much better than the exclusion and the walls and the boundaries and the myths and the stereotypes and the fear that there's so, like, love is so much better to experience than fear. And so I hope what the church does is read my words, listens to other people of color around them, right? Because my experience is only one. And so I hope that people will be curious about the other people of color that they're already in relationship with, and will be as humble as they were reading my words to listen to the people around them and to link arms with people of color and say, doing nothing is no longer an option for me. So let's do something together, and to follow the lead of the people of color around them.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a wonderful sort of hopeful note too. And I know that things aren't always hopeful and things don't always end hopefully, but
we should capture it when it happens.
Yeah, that's right. And that's, and so, yeah. And I know you've got to be going here in a minute. So, yeah, I do just want to thank you again for writing the book, for letting me talk to you and pepper you with questions.
Oh my gosh! Yes,
for a little bit. And I do want to recommend people also, if you do like audiobooks, you did also read your own words, and I listened to it as well.
Did you?
Yeah.
Do I sound okay?
Oh, you sound great. And
good.
It's wonderful. And I think
my voice always sounds so funny in my head. It sounds I'm like, is that what I sound like for real?
Yeah,
who knew?
That's my experience too. I don't know if you ever get used to it. But
I don't think I will.
Yeah, and I love that too, just because this is such a personal work, and to hear you read it yourself was really really powerful.
I'm so glad.
So, Austin, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find your book? Where can they find out more about you? Anything else you'd like to plug?
Yeah. So my website is austinchanning.com, and I've got a page dedicated to my book and all the places you can find it. But it's, all the traditional places: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, and hopefully your independent bookstore.
Yeah.
Go check, go see if it's there.
Yeah.
Order it if it's not. And then I'm on just 3 social media platforms. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Austin Channing. And I'm on Facebook with my full name, Austin Channing Brown.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing a little bit about your story and your book.
Oh, my pleasure.